Welcome back. I'm Brandon, the HBAR Bull, once again joined by Zepsi. We both do some contract work for the HBAR Foundation, but we don't do these weekly updates in any official capacity. We're just coming to you personally to give you the latest in the Hedera ecosystem. Welcome, Zep.
How's it going, Brandon?
Well, all things considered, I'm doing pretty darn good, but as always, none of this is financial advice. Use it for entertainment or educational purposes only. So, of course, the first thing we need to get into is the smart contract exploit that has resulted in Hedera deciding to make the network inaccessible. I think the best way to explain what has happened and where we are right now is with the latest update that's coming out of Hedera, so I'm going to run through that. So on the Hedera status update page, the latest is that they've identified the issue. They said that today attackers exploited the smart contract service code of the Hedera mainnet to transfer Hedera token service tokens held by victims' accounts to their own account. The attacker targeted accounts used as liquidity pools at multiple dexes that use Uniswap v2 derived contract code ported over to use Hedera token service, including Pangolin, SaucerSwap, and HeliSwap. When the attackers moved tokens obtained through these attacks over the Hashport bridge, the bridge operators detected the activity and took swift action to disable it. The Hedera community, including Swirlds Labs, the HBAR Foundation, LimeChain, Pangolin, SaucerSwap, and HeliSwap teams worked together to investigate the attack. To prevent the attacker from being able to steal more tokens, Hedera turned off mainnet proxies, which removed users' access to the mainnet. The team has identified the root cause of the issue and are working on a solution. Once the solution is ready, Hedera Council members will sign transactions to approve the deployment of the code onto mainnet to remove this vulnerability, at which point the mainnet proxies will be turned back on, allowing normal activity to resume. Now, the main takeaways from that for me is number one, that they've identified the issue and they're coming up with a solution, and also the use of these IP proxies. Now, there was an article put out way back in May of 2020 about these proxies. And I'll skip over the beginning of it because it doesn't pertain to the proxies, but we'll get down to where they actually talk about the proxies. They say, you may already know that the underlying hash graph algorithm is natively DDoS resistant through its leaderless system, and the Hedera network assists further with DOS and DDoS resistance via fees paid in HBAR per every transaction, making it expensive for an attack to persist. But the Hedera network is still in its infancy. Having additional protections in place for node operations will ensure a safe path towards permissionless expansion and eventually our goal of a fully permissionless network. For this reason, the Hedera Governing Council has approved the decision to place proxies in front of the testnet and mainnet nodes. The purpose of implementing proxies are to protect individual nodes from denial of service attacks while having zero impact on consensus within the network or between nodes. They go on to say these proxies will be deployed to the stable testnet version 5.0 release on May 5th, and again that was in 2020, and on mainnet on May 12th. These proxies will be distributed across 3 cloud environments: Google Cloud, AWS, and Microsoft Azure. Per each node, 39 proxies in total. They'll be fully controlled by Hedera today, but full control and ownership will be passed to every council member node operator individually no earlier than version 7.0 of the Hedera node software. To continue forging our path towards decentralization, Hedera Governing Council members joining the network today will be required to stand up proxies, which they singularly control within their existing environment and geography as to ensure consistent network performance. All right, Zep, it's not fun to go through these battle testing processes to make the network more robust. But, just to clarify, there's a lot of things that make up the Hedera network. At the top, of course, there is the hash graph algorithm, which we believe is the best algorithm, consensus algorithm for a DLT on Earth. And then there's services that are built on top of that. We have the cryptocurrency service. We have the file storage service, the Hedera consensus service, the token service, and of course, the smart contract service. It sounds like the issue was around the smart contract service, and there's a lot of code that's written around all of these things. So, there's going to be vulnerabilities that are found and that need to be addressed. But we have to look at how these things have been dealt with in the past on other networks and how we dealt with. And I think that Hedera went about it in a fairly rational way. They used a tool that they had in place to address this exact thing in the proxies, but it's not unprecedented. So there was a hack over on Algorand recently, and that was of one of their wallets. And there's going to be decisions that need to be made of how you're going to deal with it. Algorand decided not to do anything, and that came came under a lot of scrutiny. Hedera decided to take some action and make the network inaccessible while they worked on a fix. We have to look at, why they would make that decision. Well, there's going to be PR repercussions whether you decide to do nothing and allow funds possibly to be at risk, or you take a step like this and make the network inaccessible. So, but the thing on top of it is you might have to deal with the repercussions of the lost funds. The attack in total, I think, is around $400,000, which is generally a drop in the bucket when we talk about these attacks. But, it's not unprecedented. Hedera took their steps and we're moving forward. I think we're going to come out stronger on the other side. But a lot of people in the Ethereum space will say, well, this couldn't happen on Ethereum. Well, actually, it has happened on Ethereum. Maybe not the exact thing, but fairly close. So back in 2017, there was the DAO hack. And if we look at Cryptopedia, they say, remember the DAO? This contentious event early in the history of blockchain shook the Ethereum community to its core. The DAO was a decentralized autonomous organization that was launched in 2016 on the Ethereum blockchain. After raising $150 million worth of Ether through a token sale, the DAO was hacked due to vulnerabilities in its code base. The Ethereum blockchain was eventually hard forked to restore the stolen funds, but not all parties agreed with this decision, which resulted in the network splitting into two distinct blockchains, Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So again, Zeb, this isn't unprecedented in the space, and this is the battle testing these networks need to go through to become as robust as possible. But before we move on, Zeb, what were your thoughts on what we've seen so far?
Yesterday was a very trialing day for us all, and I'm sure it will be for the next few days. But I think one thing to really understand is that, the network is still in its first phase of decentralization. We hadn't seen an extensive attack yet. Lots of other networks have. It's almost more common for a network to have than haven't, which is something to really sort of understand that. And we had three years of sort of perfection really, and 5 billion transactions. That's we've led the industry there, and now something has happened. Go back, we are in this first phase of decentralization, and something like these node proxies. They're not necessarily a negative thing, I don't think, when you look at it. In this early stage, there is a necessity, to help protect against DDoS on singular nodes, other cyber attack vectors. It's like it's sort of the equivalent of pulling up a drawbridge. When the barbarians at the door, and the HBAR are on the inside, of course, but the barbarians are at the door. You're in your castle. And you've got your nodes behind you. It's pulling up the drawbridge, so they've got the moat around them, and they can't cross over. And in this early stage of decentralization, when we do have permission nodes, it is a necessary and obviously a very intelligent decision to have made, because it has protected a lot of investors. Okay, the PR can spin it and say, this is taking centralized control. This is the network having difficulties. Of course, there's been a difficulty here, but I think the reaction, the measures that were in place, everything has always been about security with Hedera, longevity, and I think this really does drive home the protocols that were in place, so that when something like this happened, which inevitably it was going to happen, that it could be dealt with immediately. Like we've said, there's been instances in the past on the other chains when an issue like this happens and it takes weeks, even for a response. There was a response within hours. Public response. Announcements were paused. Everything was paused. Everything went into making sure that the retail that were within those dexes are protected, that our ecosystem is protected, and that everyone came together as a community, as SWARDs, as the foundation, as Hedera, all together to protect the network, and that was done so efficiently. And obviously, this is a difficult situation, but I think the response is a byproduct, is a visualization of the professionalism of Hedera. And this is going to toughen us up. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Something like this was inevitable, and it's better for this to happen now. We're still not at a version 1 of the mainnet, like we've discussed in the past. We are in a position where it's better that these things happen early, that we are aware of them, that we fix them, whilst we're in that refinement stage, and much better now than in 3 years' time. So whilst really difficult situation. I think we have dealt with it as well as any network possibly could have, and if not the best that I've seen in instances of the past when things like this have happened.
Agreed. And this is, you can't get battle tested without having battle scars. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're going to be more robust on the backside of this. Right now we're securing millions of dollars, but in the future, it's going to be billions of dollars. And, if you look at the relative attacks, this was in the hundreds of thousands, not the millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions, which we've seen vulnerabilities result in those kind of losses. So it was contained fairly well. Just like Ethereum continued on after their issue, and they were that much better for it, and their ecosystem continued to grow. I think we're going to see the same thing within Hedera, only that much better. We're going to learn things. Our smart contracts are going to be that much better. Maybe with some of these things, we'll use app nets instead. We'll figure that's the better way to go. But you can't know that until we've gone through these trials. All right, but there is a lot of stuff good going on in the network, and once we get past this, we want to get to that. The first thing that I wanted to cover is with Shark Bites, and that's with the CBDC program down there in Australia. So let's listen to what Rob had to say. How's your week going, Rob?
Hey, Brandon. Yeah, it's been the usual roller coaster of so many things going on. So excited to reveal a few of the things on Shark Bites today.
Yeah, for sure. So last week we discussed stablecoins, and we just touched on CBDCs briefly. Then the Australian Central Bank announced a major live CBDC pilot just a few days later. So I think a deeper dive is probably warranted. Can you give us some background on the CBDC journey within Australia?
It's been going on for some time. So in a former life, I was on the Australian Payments Council. The banks reporting into the Reserve Bank. We were talking about it back in 2015, 2016. Clearly, a lot of things have happened globally. The most central banks in the world are now running experiments. They're providing white papers. The Euro area has recently come out with some significant movement. Bank of England. We all know what's happening in China with their approach to CBDC. So I think something like 120 different central banks, reserve banks, are all kind of looking at CBDCs now. So, and in Australia, we've never been a first mover, but we've always been a fast follower and always looking to kind of ride the wave, if you like, which is a very Australian approach to things. The Reserve Bank of Australia, the RBA, ran a pilot maybe 3 years ago on the wholesale banking CBDC use cases. And what that is the efficiencies around the transfer of central bank money between commercial banks. So those that have, omnibus accounts at the central bank and, sort of move trillions of dollars around every day. And that was reasonably successful. I mean, they learned a lot of lessons. And then about 2 years ago, the then governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia kind of in his report said that they saw a very strong case for wholesale CBDCs, but the jury was still out on retail CBDCs. And so a retail CBDC is a central bank digital currency that the population, the citizens of a country can use as well. It's obviously a lot less controlled, or it should be a lot less controlled than a wholesale version, which is is used by just a handful of parties in terms of the banks and the Reserve Bank.
So just to clarify that, so a wholesale would be like base money, right? And
Sure.
Then the retail would be like cash in circulation.
It has to be cash-like. And that's the whole point. For a future state where there is a central bank digital currency in general circulation, then it has to have all the features, at least, that we currently have with cash. And that's why there's a lot of resistance to the perception of control or surveillance capitalism or any of those aspects of the financial system. And actually, the Reserve Bank felt that there was no strong case for a retail CBDC yet. The technology that is required to transfer a CBDC offline, if you don't have an internet connection, to have cash-like components to it, simply wasn't really there 2 or 3 years ago. But what they did say, what the governor said, was that he expected privately issued stablecoins to fill the gap. And that's what we've seen as well. We've seen with USDC and all the other stable coins. We've seen in Australia with ANZ Bank and now the National Australia Bank, NAB, announcing their own stable coins that are 100% collateralized by Australian dollars. That is coming to pass. So we've got the wholesale base money, as you say, at one end of the spectrum. We've got privately issued stable coins at the other end of the spectrum. And then there's a space in the middle where we don't really know where the boundaries are. Is it a retail CBDC that we all get to kind of make payments with, or transfer funds, mobile phone to mobile phone, or through some other electronic mechanism? Or are we all going to use stable coins that we get on an exchange or get issued by our bank directly to our wallet? And then what does that mean? It's a very, very interesting space. As a payments guy, I'm super excited about this. I wrote a stablecoin white paper for the Reserve Bank a couple of years ago when I was at FPOS, and did some work for the Australian Payments Network. And so it's an ongoing conversation, and it's kind of led to where we are today.
So speaking of stablecoins, what's the Australian regulatory posture towards CBDCs versus stablecoins, which we talked about last week?
So, it's like what I've just said, really. There's an expectation that stablecoins will exist in the economy. There is an expectation that it'll be regulated, and the easiest way to regulate is through existing regulated institutions like banks. And then others. So there could be an additional regulatory regime which provides licenses to non-authorized deposit-taking institutions. But that's still kind of up for debate. The first movers in ANZ Bank and National Australia Bank are kind of breaking new ground here. And what's really interesting is that the number of stablecoin type use cases that are now being talked about within the context of this pilot, as opposed to retail CBDCs. So that this initiative is really driving that discussion.
So let's get into the topic of the day, this CBDC pilot. The Reserve Bank of Australia, so your central bank, is doing this in collaboration with the Digital Finance Cooperative Research Centre, or the DFCRC. Who or what are they, and what do you think their goals are with this CBDC pilot?
Well, firstly, they issue really nice T-shirts to those who are in the pilot. No, the CRCs are a mechanism that Australia has had since 1990. The Cooperative Research Centres. It's a mechanism for government to collaborate with industry, with academia and end users to address kind of big problems, big economic problems, or big sectorial problems that one or a few of those parties couldn't solve themselves. So and they go across all sectors. Big agricultural CRCs have been in existence for decades. We've had mining ones. We've had all sorts of economic based CRCs, and the Digital Finance CRC was set up last year to drive the concepts of digital finance in Australia for the good of all of Australia. And so the RBA, the Reserve Bank, and the DFCRC, as their first sort of set of projects, focused on CBDCs, but they have others over the course of the 10 years that this has been set up for.
So another name that's brought up a few times when we've had these conversations is Not Centralized. And while I was going through this, I noticed that they're listed as one of the collaborators. What is their role in this CBDC pilot?
So the pilot sought applications for to join, so projects to join this pilot. And I think over 140, 150 applications were made into the DFCRC for consideration. It's a very short-term pilot, actually. It's only going to run for 2 or 3 months between now and sort of May time. And so the applicants had to be ready to go. The CBDC network has been stood up, but the technology is not future state. It's just an expedient technology. It's actually a private Ethereum fork. In order to demonstrate what a technology platform issuing CBDCs would be. The real interest, the real purpose of the pilot is for real-world problems to be solved in by a variety of projects, and how they would do that using a CBDC. So this relatively short period needed projects that were ready to go, needed really good use cases, and a variety of use cases. And so from those 140 applicants, 14 were selected. And we have, in Australia, my colleague Nico has got most of the credit for building up this relationship with Not Centralized, but they're a great and vibrant Web3 studio that has been driving the DeFi conversation for the last couple of years. One of the founders I've worked with in a previous life, Nick Bishop, and his co-founders, Mark and Arturo, have been driving this debate through meetups. They've been delivering some great use cases on other chains. They've been leading the way with Starkware and Ethereum, and then they discovered Hedera. And their posture has now changed. And I hope to be able to introduce them to you so you can kind of bring them on the show, and I don't butcher their entire go-to-market proposition. But they're looking at kind of a compliance layer. They want to be regulatory compliant. They want to be bank grade. They want to be able to move institutional finance forward in Australia. And Hedera is perfect for that. So we started talking to them a while ago about what that might look like. And then the opportunity for this CBDC pilot came up, and they, being so well kind of plugged in, thought it was worth them going up against the likes of the banks and MasterCard and some big players in the space. And they were one of the selected finalists. The 14. They've got a great use case. It's called trade flows. It addresses the problem with cash flow in the construction industry. So the problem with traders not getting paid on time, contractors not getting the right level of sign-off from customers, and therefore not being able to pay their staff, and all the friction that happens in that industry. And they're using the CBDC to provide central bank risk-free collateral to a stablecoin that is issued. Stablecoin gets locked in a contract. The contract is smart contract, enables the counterparties to agree terms, and the programmable money aspect of the stablecoin enables it to be triggered on the signature of the parties. And then they've got a cool set of users around a bathroom renovation use case. So a number of milestones that will get triggered at certain points on that project and demonstrate that this frictionless movement of money can be triggered based on the objectivity of a contract like that. So it's really cool, and I'm building it on Hedera makes perfect sense because of it, all the positive beneficial properties of Hedera and its speed and its trust, and we keep on coming back to this, the credibility of the governing council that it brings to a use case like this. It's that the governance and the level of credibility that the governing council brings is huge, and it can't be understated, especially when you're pitching a project to a reserve bank for a use case which is just one of 140. So I'm sure it was a lot more difficult for them to get it across the line than that, and I know there's a lot of hard work that they put in, as well as Nico and the team. So credit to them, and I'm looking forward to sort of helping push this through and cheer them on.
Exciting stuff. The other name that I saw on there a lot was ANZ Bank, and I know that they're working with Hedera fairly extensively. Do you think they're going to be incorporating Hedera in this CBDC pilot at all?
Well, they've got four. They've got 4 of the 14 projects across a range of different use cases. I can't say whether or not they're going to be using the Hedera smart contract approach to stablecoins or another chain. Hopefully, I'm sure all of that will come out in time.
All right, sounds good. Okay, you mentioned that this is only a 3-month pilot.
Yep.
What do you expect to happen after the pilot?
So there's a chance that it'll get extended. some of these things take longer than anticipated up front. So it's not a hard stop. The real purpose really is to inform the discussion going forward. So I expect that once it's concluded, once these projects have delivered, there'll be a period of reflection and lessons being learned and papers written and sort of important people being briefed. And that will inform the Reserve Bank's posture for CBDCs at the retail end going forward. Incidentally, the DFCRC don't actually differentiate between the wholesale and retail. It's just a continuum for CBDC and different use cases. And I tend to take that approach as well, extending all the way into stable coins. It's just digital money on the spectrum. And the interoperability between those coins becomes the feature of the network. So my expectation is that post the pilot, there'll be a few months of reflection and then a announcement for what happens next.
Yeah. And speaking of the DFCRC, I watched a clip of what they're trying to do in general, and I think they're the exact kind of people that we want to have involved here. Actually, we might as well show the audience what they're up to.
The only constant is change. And right now, the financial world is changing at an extraordinary speed, powered by innovations, new technologies, and new markets. Financial systems underpin every aspect of economic activity, from exploration and mining to how we're going to fund our retirement.
There is no denying digitisation and the connected world has changed everything and is now the engine of economic power. Large new marketplaces are emerging around surprising asset classes. Take, for example, internet search, where every word in the dictionary now has a dollar value and is traded in real time. The English language is now a market with a value that rivals some national stock exchanges.
Exchanges started trading electronically in the late 1980s, which led to an explosion of trading volumes and value. The majority of the infrastructure that underpinned this transformation was pioneered in Australia. 30 years on, the next transformation is upon us. The pace of economic activity will be supercharged again because this time, the assets themselves are being digitised.
Digitized assets are individual digital objects that represent something of value and include ownership rights to the asset plus all of its associated attributes. They could represent a bar of gold, a barrel of oil, an agricultural crop, or a single panel in a solar farm. New technology components, like blockchain registers, have many ideal properties as stores of digital assets. But according to the Digital Finance CRC bid, this by themselves won't drive the next transformation. A full ecosystem needs to be created to ensure that the next generation economy operates seamlessly and is fair, efficient, and robust.
The Digital Finance CRC is about creating the 4 building blocks that are needed to power the digitized economy. It's about how each individual asset is going to be digitized. It's about how the ownership registry for those assets becomes a transactional centerpiece for trading, and then how decentralized marketplaces will emerge to trade these assets and how they operate. And finally, it's about developing a regulatory framework that provides trust and integrity for this new ecosystem.
The Digital Finance CRC bid is a cross-industry, multidisciplinary consortium representing some of Australia's leading domestic and international innovators in business and research. We will tap into the single biggest economic opportunity available today, but work must begin now. So Australia will be an owner in this revolution, not merely a customer.
Well, they certainly seem like some forward thinkers, Rob. So how exactly do you think Hedera is going to be leveraged and used during the pilot?
The stablecoin is the primitive, sort of element in all of this. And what we have, as I talked about last week, is this amazing hybrid stablecoin open source template that Greg Scullard and his team at Swells have developed, which enables very easily stablecoins to be issued on Hedera, while utilizing the speed and security and fairness of the the Hedera token service rather than just a smart contract, while retaining all the benefits of a smart contract for things like admin permissions across all of the aspects that you need to manage a bank-grade stablecoin. And in addition to that, having all the hooks into the service providers, such as custody providers and proofs of reserve and fraud management and reporting. So those layers of value around a stablecoin such as this mean that the not centralized project can be accelerated. It can fit into the time frame that has been given, and we get all the learnings of running it in a project such as this. The uses of it, the smart contracts that encapsulate the agreements between parties, all of those will be additional values sort of built out by not centralized. But the Hedera network provides that kind of base layer capability to do all of those things.
Well, it seems like this pilot's going to be the perfect platform to allow Hedera to prove out its attributes to actual decision makers in the space.
Well, yet again, not in isolation, right? Time and time again, we're seeing this happening, and I've got quite a lot of projects about to kick off that are very similar on stablecoins, and that's just one thing across the whole of the Hedera landscape. So it's. Every week, you ask me about my week, every week is a roller coaster of new things coming up that we didn't even know about that are super exciting.
Is very exciting stuff. Rob, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about this week?
Just one thing.
Nice shirt, Rob.
It's great, isn't it? So Elizabeth from Hello Future Buzz sent this to me because of the Hedera convention that's coming up in October. And for the longest time, this great community in Hedera have been talking about getting together. We've recently been able to have smaller groups kind of forming at some of the conferences that we go to, and it's always great to see Hedera fans at conferences that Swirls or the Foundation or the Hashgraph Association or Hedera itself are at. But we're going to get a proper convention that Elizabeth Chase is organising. So I just wanted to big shout out to Elizabeth for all the effort, all the great things that she's doing for the community on her Twitter space and organising this convention. I can't remember the dates. It's October, end of October. Apparently, it's in Lehman and Mantz's diaries as well. So it should be awesome. But thank you for the T-shirt, Elizabeth.
Yeah, we're going to get all kinds of people there. I'm certainly going to go. I would like to set up a Twittertal booth. I forget, she said there's already 60 or 80 people that are interested in having booths there, but I would like to set up a Twittertal booth there to allow people to come and Twitchitize some of their objects, so it'll be fun to see how everything comes out, but it'll be good to get together as well. Rob, thank you so much for swinging by, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thanks, Brandon.
So, Zeb, it's always good to hear from Rob, especially on days like today, because he is very enthusiastic about what the potentials are for the space. But there was some other news that came out, and this one was a competitor to Docusign, and it's called DocStribute, and they are building on Hedera. RegTech Analysis said about it, the new solution will be available to companies of all sizes, but was particularly built around the needs of SMEs. It claims DSign will democratize digital signatures by making all features available for all sectors at a single low-cost flat fee. DocStribute hopes to take on an established market by offering drastically lower fees, unlimited users, DLT security, two-factor authentication as a standard, and much more. Built on Hedera Hashgraph, a distributed ledger, DSign leverages cryptography, 256-digit alphanumeric code, and three-factor verification to store documents and create secure links to them. When a document is signed, the contents of the documents, including the signature, are secured with the DocStribute digital stamp, ensuring one true source of the final contract while recording a real-time audit trail. So, Zeb, all kinds of really good stuff being built on Hedera, but it's also a good place to work, apparently. Can you tell us about the Forbes list?
Yeah, so Forbes put out their top 500, I think, startups to work for, and Hedera came in at rank 35, which is pretty extraordinary. There's no other blockchain above it, no other distributed ledger behind it, no other crypto above it. And I think the closest competitor within the realm of DLT to that was Ava Labs, i.e. Avalanche. And they were about 59 ranks further away, so behind us. So that's amazing to see. There's obviously Hedera is a great place to work. The philosophy of Manson Lehman has always passed down. It's an exciting place to work. It's at the cutting edge of the cutting edge. So to see that being recognized by Forbes on that scale, next to 500 other names, that's really exciting to see. And I'm sure a lot of people, obviously a lot of people read Forbes, a lot of people are looking for jobs. So you never know. Maybe we'll have some super talent coming in the future.
There you go. And we also have a council member that's repping Hedera in Aberdeen. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Hedera's got a serious representation of ecosystem projects and ecosystem figures or organizations at South by Southwest, which is, one of the biggest conventions for sort of tech, for media, for emerging technologies, and coming straight out of Austin, Texas. Texas being the home of Hedera. And so in the past, we've often said, it'd be great for the council to become more engaged. And I think we're really seeing that more and more, especially in the mid to late section of last year, going into this year. And as in line with that, we have Aberdeen. Aberdeen, 508 billion assets under management. Straight out of Edinburgh in the UK, who are tokenizing their funds on Hedera, and they're going to be talking about tokenization, enterprise in Web3 at South by Southwest. So we've got Duncan, who's I think our council member he is our council member for Aberdeen, the representative. So he's going to be there at South by Southwest, talking about Hedera, talking about Web3, and really driving home legitimacy for us on that stage. But alongside Aberdeen, alongside the GC, we've got ecosystem projects like Road Code. Road Code was developed by Reality Plus, who also developed Own the Zone, which is the FIFA official licensed game on Hedera, the mobile game for the World Cup and some of the future tournaments. And so they've developed Road Code, which is the first of its kind Web3 cycling sort of metaverse, I suppose. It's got sort of data tracking, but also gaming and sort of fan engagement and NFTs. It's a real cycling universe for Web3, for cycling in Web3. And within that, they've got major partners with Velon, who are one of the biggest teams or one of the biggest sort of trademarks within cycling. And also they've got a lot of stuff with some of the major competitions that we'll hear about later in the year. So maybe we'll hear more about that at Southwest. I'm not sure, but again, great to show not only can Hedera be used for a serious enterprise use case like the tokenization of funds, but also for something like a cycling metaverse. All of this can be done within the layer one, which is Hedera. And even to stretch that further, we also have Totem Earth, who are going to be there. Totem Earth are one of our big hitters in sustainability. They're the first carbon marketplace to integrate the ARM. The ARM being a piece of open source infrastructure on Hedera, on the works in parallel with the Guardian, to basically enable deep liquidity to highly complex assets like carbon credits, like renewable energy credits, and so on and so forth. And that piece of open source infrastructure, the Guardian is a revelation in itself, but the ARM on top of that, these two pieces of infrastructure are really, really reshaping these climate markets. And they are one of the clearest examples of real world value that DLT can provide to an industry that needs it, i.e. climate financing. To see Road Code there, to see Aberdeen there, and see Totem there, that's three major parts of our ecosystem showing the breadth of our utility. And really excited to have them all out there.
And speaking of good representation, one of my favorite representatives in this space is Jim Nasr of Acoer. And we caught up with him a few days ago, and he had some really great insights to pass on. So listen in. Jim, we'll start off with your company, Acoer, that's building on Hedera in the healthcare space. Can you remind us what Acoer does, how it leverages Hedera, and maybe some of the latest developments?
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. We're a software development company. We're really focused on building products that run more or less out of the box, that are usable, modern, try to solve a specific problem within the healthcare, largely within the healthcare space. We do some other smaller projects in other industries as well. But that's really kind of our focus. And there are many, many problems in healthcare, clinical research. Most of them are really they really stem from data that is siloed and opaque systems that really don't provide much transparency and auditability, if you like, all of which are really good fits for what Hedera does at its most basic. So that's really what we do. In terms of recent things, we have over the last, I would say that last 6 months in particular, we have really tried to refocus on our public health kind of background. As you may know, I was the chief software architect at the CDC, and we have done over the years a number of products, or we have built a number of solutions around our Hashlog and Health Data Explorer product within public health. So that's really been our focus. And we think that, kind of finally, knock on wood, we're getting closer to both greater adoption, but also, more repeatable process for us to go to market. And a lot of it really comes down to what you may think of as kind of basic, for instance, chain of custody, proof of authenticity of data, proof of authenticity of interaction, ethical sharing, things like this. But those things actually move the needle if implemented correctly. So that's really the focus of recent times.
And I mean, it sounds like a lot of provenance of data, so HCS would come into play there. Do you also use tokenization or anything else?
We do. So we do use HCS extensively for a number of good reasons. Economic viability is a part of it. Speed up transactions is a part of it. We can abstract it. We do use HTS. We do have a couple of use cases around using non-fungible tokens in particular to essentially anchor data sets or anchor things like consent, like patient consent, to, for instance, potentially participate in clinical research. So for that, we use HTS and smart contracts. We've also got a couple of projects, and one in particular around patient recruitment for what is called orphan drug development, basically rare diseases, which is difficult to find patients for. It's an underserved space. So we're using basically a token economics approach to incentivize patients. And we're, again, given the context in the industry, we use a pretty conservative approach of an inflationary token model. When there's a reward, we do a buyback and burn. So we try and more or less manage any kind of inflation within that with this deflation on the buyback. And really the whole idea is that from a user or patient perspective, they're getting rewarded with US dollars. And the token economics really is there to more or less show our homework, to be ethical, to use the benefits of a public ledger and the tokenization that goes with that. But from a user perspective, abstract, dealing with the tokens at the native level. So so that's certainly what we do with HTS.
Really interesting stuff. You also assist the HBAR Foundation with the administration of the Privacy Fund. I've been very impressed by some of the privacy-focused grantees coming out of that fund. Can you tell us how things are progressing in Hedera's privacy space?
Yeah, we're kind of seeing the first set of cohorts who were approved sometime in mid 2022, kind of get to their 6-month production milestone. So we're all kind of, for this, the initial 2 or 3, we're looking at what they're really doing and how they're getting to market. I think we're seeing some good progress in context of both understanding where the market opportunity is, but also, how to try and go to that space. It's never easy, right? There is an uphill battle not a battle, but certainly it's a narrative that you have to have a compelling kind of rationale behind. You can't just say because it's Web3 it's going to work, because it tends to be an enterprise approach. So we're seeing some of that happen. One of the folks that we're most, I guess, enthused by, or I am anyway, is this Fiduciary Data Corporation. And they're really kind of, you may remember, Brandon, about 6 months ago, they did a crowdcast or webcast with yourself and talked about this B2B solution they were building for taking, data and then essentially providing custodian type services, really the analog side, right? Things like, when you have keys, even multi-sig, technically is relatively straightforward. But in real life, particularly when you go outside the happy path, it's not straightforward. You really have to consider, well, how does the 99% analog real world fit into this? And that's the kind of services they provide, interacting with attorneys, notary publics, and helping you manage, the kind of slightly off the happy path scenarios, which is really many. So with them, what we're seeing is that as well as the B2B, use case that they started with, which is a long tail. It takes a long time to kind of build the sales cycle. They've also got into a B2C space now around data rights and data certificates. Literally anyone can take whatever. I mean, it could be, it could be some kind of a settlement agreement. It could be a contract. It could be whatever you want. I mean, the asset isn't, I think, limited. It's really this idea that you want to establish a data right for it, and thereafter any associations to it, they can provide custodian type services as well as what you get digitally. So we're excited about what they're doing with data rights. And I think that's a good example. I think we're also seeing, and you may have heard about this just recently. It was on Twitter. One of our other privacy grantees is this corporation or this company called Tomb Tech. And they're doing some really interesting things with decentralized identity, essentially bringing Hedera DIDs to MetaMask. And I'm a big believer, for what it's worth, that, again, look, MetaMask has over 10 million users, I think 3 million monthly active users. That's a very large audience. And if it can ease their entry into Hedera through this data approach or other approaches, that is a good thing, right? And I think ultimately there will be winners and losers in the wallet space. I don't think it's feasible for any consumer to have 30 wallets on their phones. That just doesn't make sense. So I think we're excited about what they're doing. We're also taking, again, this idea of taking these grants and making them real. We're taking what they're doing with this MetaMask and the DID and actually fitting it right into one of our healthcare use cases as well for an alternate means for patient access to a healthcare portal that we have developed. So yeah, those are the things we're excited by. There's some more that's still, in development, but we're seeing some good trends.
Yeah, those are some really good teams you have going there. And, talking about DIDs, even my company, Twigital, is looking at that for authenticators and appraisers and things like that. So that's going to be a really critical piece to the ecosystem as well. So, Jim, you're really engaged in the Hedera community in general. You get involved with the HBAR Foundry. I see it on almost every Twitter space I've seen. I'd like to give you the floor to tell us about what you think of the Hedera ecosystem as a whole, or, what you're most excited about in the space.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be and sound redundant. The Hedera community is engaged. People like yourself, you do amazing work and Elizabeth on spaces to really help engage with different members, different projects, different ideas. So I love that. And I think one of the reasons why, the primary reason why I try and listen in is because I learn. There are loads of things that I don't know and we don't do and don't really plan to do. However, they're important things to understand. And it's important to understand where the community is going, because sometimes there are things that we can do to help at least not be redundant, if not accelerate things. So that's the way I look at it. I'm definitely enthused about it. I think also you mentioned, for instance, the HBAR Foundry. I think it's good when you have certain people, who've been around and are actively building, in the space, young, old, with different ideas, to kind of try and have conversations on what are some of the, I think of it as a negative space. Like, what's the negative space? What is it that we're not seeing, right? Because we're all very good, I think, Brandon, at spotting things that are around us and then trying to dissect and analyze that. But we're not really very good at things that we don't see. I'll give you an example. I think a good example is around like mirror nodes. It's something that I brought up and other folks, at the HBAR Foundry and other places. I feel like that's an area where, as a community, I know I'm including the governance council in this. We have not really thought through the nuance, nor the practical, real life implications of how to build, around this, which is it's a critical tool for the community in a way that it does really scale for different use cases. I don't mean scale in the context of transaction scaling, that's a part of it, but it's really more about, providing ways in which you can have different outfits, tap into mirror nodes and mirror node functionality in a way that doesn't create massive financial burden for one or two organizations, because I feel like, that may be a scenario. But that's just an example. I think there are other examples. I think you do a good job, really good job, when you engage with the NFT community to suss out usability type issues, because I think that remains an issue. And it's not a Hedera specific thing. I think that's a Web3, kind of problem. I think for almost everybody in the world, they're really kind of they're coming from a Web 2 and a consumerist approach, things that work on their phone. And Web 3 is not at that level. So us being involved in the community and really thinking through usability is really important, because ultimately, in my opinion, if you don't have usability, you don't get adoption. You don't get adoption, you're not going to continue and be sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, so many great insights there. And really, I mean, I think that, we look a lot to the enterprise as if they are the leaders, but a lot of the leaders in the space are going to be the small builders, the entrepreneurs, the startups in the space. And then the enterprises are actually going to follow a lot of the people in the community. So, Jim, thank you so much for swinging by today. Good luck with Acoer and everything else you're working on.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate your time.
So, Zep, I definitely have to get Jim back more often. He has some great insights and he's building some really impressive stuff in the space. So what can you tell us about the C14 on-ramp that was announced by the HBAR Foundation?
Yeah, so an on-ramp, a fiat on-ramp is a crucial part of an ecosystem in Web3. It enables a user to use their credit card to buy an asset like HBAR or Hedera USDC, i.e., Circle stablecoin on Hedera payment rails. It allows a user to put in their credit card and buy those two assets very easily, and then use that asset within whatever decentralized application they're working within. C14, obviously we've got other on ramps like Banxa and I think MoonPay as well, and some others. But the sort of the angle that C14 has gone for is to try and serve the underserved regions. Ones that are outside of the US, perhaps in places like Brazil, Singapore, Hong Kong, places where we don't necessarily have that infrastructure at the moment or didn't before. And so C14, their first integration was with HeliSwap, who are based in Hong Kong, I believe. It's enabling our ecosystem as a whole to be able to serve more of our ecosystem participants, regardless of what region they're in. And I know that their strategy is to keep increasing that the customer base in terms of geography. Just a good integration for us to have. And any dApps that want to integrate it, they can do so through the C14 website.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to remind everybody that there is the Sustainable Blockchain Summit, and that's going to be held on April 13th. But there is going to be a hackathon wrapped up in that. They're going through the ideation phase right now. So certainly if you're interested in that, go sign up. And speaking of sustainability, Wes got an opportunity to explain our sustainability ecosystem on Hedera to the Hyperledger audience. So let's listen to that as well.
I'll take a quick pause to take a step back and look at a higher view. So where does the Guardian fit within an ecosystem, right? So in the ecological markets workflow, you have what I call as our work in progress diagram. There's always folks being added to this. We try to simplify it to make it easy to understand, but you have a project that would start, and one of the applications in our ecosystem, some of the names you saw at the beginning, Dovu, Timeless, Cryptsy, there's many others, would ultimately digitize a methodology. Of course, you could digitize a methodology as well and work with folks like validation and verification bodies. For example, DNV is working with a company called Evercity, who is creating forwards and publishing methodologies for specific types of assets, which they announced at COP27, and they could be working with a registry. And so for some, one example is gold standard. And so if they were following a gold standard methodology with a VVB and a project, you could ultimately say, I want to lay that out digitally. And I want to use the Guardian to compare that to the previous methodologies where somebody can hold these assets, even in their forward stage, if you were to use Evercity in a forward, but ultimately when it's redeemed to create a token, once you've completed verification, that could be held in an account with a wallet on Hedera. We have many popular wallets on Hedera. We also have capabilities around, for folks who are curious around what types of wallets, happy to have that discussion, including things like MetaMask and how to use that on Hedera. But ultimately those assets are created, auditable down to the unit of value or metric ton. So often an NFT on Hedera following the IWA standards. So the Interwork Alliance, for those who aren't familiar, has created standards around voluntary ecological markets assets where the carbon removal unit is actually an NFT. And we can trade those assets, and we could even wrap them and create fungible versions of those assets if we wanted different types of liquidity. But folks like Tolamar are trading those assets in their unique units of value to trade based on the attributes rather than based on the commonalities, and still maintaining liquidity in the process. But you can see those assets on Explorers on Hedera, and you can ultimately take them into ESG reporting applications. One we recently announced was CorpStage, who's building an ESG reporting application to understand carbon emissions tokens, as well as offsets for CDP-based reporting. And so that's kind of what it looks like in the ecosystem. I went very fast. but I'm always happy to take questions on this and get into a little bit further detail before I pass it over to Daniel.
As always, Wes did a great job explaining what they're doing at the Sustainable Impact Fund. But let's move on to something a little bit more fun, and that's in gaming. Karateka, which is building a game on Hedera, but they are doing it for karate combat. They just came out with an announcement trying to engage the Hedera community. So I'm really interested to see what they come out with. Of course, the IP, the branding around karate combat is fantastic. So I'm sure they have a lot to work with. And we also saw some stuff come out of Cosmium. What did we see there?
Yeah, so Cosmium, of course, they migrated from Solana. We saw that happen, 3 or 4 months ago now, which was, that was a great cause of success. A game 5 years in development, if not more, who'd chosen Solana to then backtrack and say, Hedera is actually the network for us. I think they cited the governance, they cited the speed, security, all these different things. And the low fixed fees, actually, when I spoke to their team there, that was one of the seals on the deal. But they're going to be coming out in their open beta, I think, in Q2. So they're releasing some of the in-game footage at the moment, some new images, some new video clips as well, I think. So that's been really cool to see. I'm really excited for that, for a really high-quality game to be out on computer that leverages the Hedera network for token services and NFTs and in-game items and the tokenization of those items. This is the first game in development that we're going to see. I think it's probably going to be the first computer game, at least, that we can really get our hands on. So yeah, really exciting to see, and exciting to see the token service in action there.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, we'll go ahead and get into network analysis. Now, there's not too much to cover, of course, as far as network analysis, but we can show that there is some transactions that are going through. The network is not completely shut down, but over the past hour, we haven't done as many transactions as we would normally see happening every second. So, Zeb, we'll skip the rest of the network analysis, but there's a fair amount going on in our NFT space. Can you give us an update there?
Yeah, so we saw HIP 657 get approved by the council, and that means that dynamic NFTs are coming to our ecosystem. And that essentially means that the metadata within an NFT can be changed over time. It can evolve. And so for certain use cases, particularly in gaming, but across the NFT landscape, this is something that can developers can really play around with. They have their creative license has kind of doubled there. When you can create something that can evolve with your game, with your character, whatever it is, that is a serious piece of utility. And, I don't have the imagination to quite imagine how the extent of that, but, people like Patches, people like Brandon, all of our community, I'm sure they're going to have a lot of fun with that. So, yeah, really excited to see that get passed. Another piece of infrastructure to put in our belt, and another piece of infrastructure that shows why Hedera NFTs are particularly unique, on top of things like on-chain royalties.
We actually see that as a potential for Twigital being able to update the metadata and the information associated with an NFT so you can follow that physical object through its lifetime. But either way, continue.
Amazing. Yeah, no, there you go. You got the creative license as well. So it's exciting to see everything being built in the ecosystem, that's for sure. But yeah, so alongside that great development, really excited to see where that goes, especially with Twigital. But there is also Le Good Society. Le Good Society, they came out last year and did this plastic-free campaign. They had their own gallery where they were, hosted different Hedera NFTs, really high-quality work, some great established artists in the Web2 world. And part of this campaign was all about, the environment, about Earth Day, about preservation, conservation, etc., etc. And so they're doing it again this year, again on Hedera as the most environmentally efficient network, as proven by UCL. They are not only creating these NFTs again, but they're having these big billboards, on the highway or motorway, as we call it in the UK. I think it's in the UK that they're doing it. And on these billboards, they're going to be flexing not only the artists that are building on the Good Society, but also our community. And so if you are a creator, if you're an NFT creator, whatever within the industry, you can join this competition, which is currently being run on their profile, where you can do this competition hosted by Bounty Block to basically get your NFT on this billboard to show, hundreds of thousands of drivers, the Hedera NFT community. So that's a cool one as well to definitely keep an eye on. Alongside that, we also had the Mint Founders Pass. So that I think is coming out on the 23rd of March. But Mint is a music NFT project on Hedera that we'll learn more about shortly. And they're established in the music industry, especially in the UK. And they're basically going to be bringing artists from, enabling artists in the traditional Web2 music world with extra revenue, through on-chain royalties on Hedera, through NFTs on Hedera, and they're basically going to be a sort of launch pad / manager for these musicians to really get some high quality talent over. So yeah, they're going to be launching their first mint on the 23rd, I think. So just one to look out for. And then also Dead Pixels. We had, of course, the Dead Pixels mint. There was a few hiccups, or a hiccup. It was just so unfortunately timed. Obviously the timing was basically in the run up to what we covered at the start of this episode. So they just got a really unlucky date there with their mint. But they're a fantastic team, and they'll only continue to deliver. So yeah, it's been a busy week for sure.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff going on in the NFT space. And I do want to get into the HBAR market. One kind of positive thing is the entire market was down yesterday. And I think a lot of the mess around Hedera got overshadowed by that. So when we come out on the other side of this, that's going to be a benefit, I think. But let's get into the market real quick. So like most of the network analysis, we're going to skip DeFi this week, but we'll be back with it next week. There are many macro currents influencing the market right now. In particular, here on Friday, we saw the largest bank failure since the 2008 financial crisis. And no, it wasn't Silvergate, but the 16th largest bank in the US, Silicon Valley Bank, which put pressure on risk assets, including crypto. The S&P 500 is off 1.7% at the time of recording. But honestly, I think that's a bit overdone. Bitcoin also broke key support at about 21,400 and has continued to fall. Bitcoin is currently sitting at just under $20,000, down 6% on the day and about 15% on the week. Surprisingly, HBAR is holding up very well, all things considered. At the time of recording, HBAR is at 5.8 cents, flat on the day and down about 15% on the week. We're just above an area of possible support at about 5.5 to 5.6 cents, and I'd expect resistance at around 6 cents. All right, Zeb, that's pretty much all we have. Is there anything else you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, just that it's been a rough day, last couple of days for us all. But one thing I think, if there's any comfort to be had, is reiterated at the start, which is the response to the incident, the professionalism of that, and also, that we are in this sort of early stage of the network, and we're not at that V1 yet. We're still in that sort of refinement period whereby, we have these services. But we are in that attuning stage. The code is still being updated. We're still getting hips passed. Hips will always be a part, but there are things that constantly need updating and editing and changing and retuning. And it's just better, I think, that it happened now than further down the line when, say, we've got 100 billion, 300, 500, however trillion dollars going through Hedera. It's much better that we catch this early. And it's been a knock in the chest, I think, for all of us, of course. But it's happened. It happens on a lot of networks, and I know Hedera, they put security and longevity and professionalism before everything. And so, we know that they're going to come back stronger. We know that they've got the community's best interest in heart. We know that, this is going to be something that we take in our step, are better for in the long term, I think. But, alongside that, we had the CBDC as discussed with Sharky today. It's just, there's, even when the going gets rough, amazing things have happened that we can't let just go under the rug. We got 5 billion transactions on the mainnet. We are the leading, in terms of throughput, we are the leading most used network. We're getting these mainstream sort of banks and banking systems and financial systems showing their interest. And, that's not going to slow down. It's only going to keep going. It's only going to pick up as we go forward in time. And we just can't get put off in these early days, I don't think. We see the big picture. We've always known it, and we always will. And just stay positive out there. Obviously it's tough, but yeah, positivity is what I'm going to be trying to go for.
Sure, absolutely. And just like Ethereum had their big snafu back in 2017 and they had to get through it and came back stronger on the other side, that's exactly what I expect to happen here. Our ecosystem is going to continue to grow, and we're going to be here continuing to cover that ecosystem every week. So we'll be here for you. And that's pretty much all we have. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.